What's going on, guys? It's Zach here, bringing you guys another fantasy football video. And this one, I'm going to go over the best auction values on the ESPN platform specifically. I think that it's something that people really don't take into account enough, and that's how much the platform they're playing on really impacts the different players that really present values during your draft. I think that in general, the people that you'll be playing with in your league, whether they know it or not, are going to conform pretty heavily to either the ADP or the pre-draft value they see during your draft, and that's something that you should really go into your draft with knowledge of and take advantage of. So in this video, I'm going to be going over a summation of how went through the top 200 players by ADP over at Fantasy Pros, and then compared that to what their expected draft cost would be historically speaking. This is basically what I'm looking at is how much should you expect to pay for a player that's going at this ADP. And for all these intents and purposes, I'm going on a 12-team league with a $200 budget, but the budget itself would scale, and then obviously you can spend a bit more on higher end players if you're in a smaller league. But by doing that, then I can compare what the expected value or expected cost you should have to pay for a player given their ADP to the cost that you're being asked to pay on each platform. That allows us to see which players present themselves as different values on whichever platform you're on, and this really helps you go into the draft knowing which guys and which positions even you should target. And I think that's a really helpful way of really viewing and analyzing which players are the best draft picks to make during your draft, because it really does matter platform to platform. I will try to get a good summary of this up on my website as well. So for any of you who want to look at that, I'll also post a summary of where I looked at what the projected auction value of each of these players is, and then you can compare that to whatever the auction values are on your platform as well. I'll try to put it up for some of the major platforms like ESPN, Yahoo, Sleeper, and stuff like that, but it's kind of hard to find auction values in general. It's this early on in the season, so you sort of have to be a little bit league specific. But yeah, with that, let's get into the first player, and if you have any questions, you can feel free to let me know in the comments. So starting off with really the most exciting one for me, Chris Olave seems to be the best value on the ESPN platform. He really comes out as the single best bargain on the ESPN platform this season by his ADP, which is basically at the 2-3 turn, generally really early on in the third round. He should cost you roughly 20% of your budget in a 12-team league, and on ESPN he only costs you 13%. So this is a player that I've been super high on. I love drafting him even at his ADP in that third round. So if I'm on the ESPN platform, he's a guy that I'm just absolutely targeting everywhere. He's significantly cheaper than a lot of the wide receivers that are drafted around him. I don't really know why, but for whatever reason, he's just a huge bargain on ESPN specifically, and he's a guy that I think you just absolutely need to draft if you have any faith in him at all and you're on the ESPN platform. So one of the next best values that I think I really would recommend targeting if you're drafting over on ESPN is Christian Kirk. I actually think he's honestly a really good player. He's coming off of a season in which he finished as a wide receiver one in fantasy, and I think that a lot of people are in general just a little bit too scared of Calvin Ridley this season. I think that even if Ridley does emerge and show that he's still an alpha in this league, I think there's plenty of room for Christian Kirk to perform well as well. This is going to be a team that should be even better than they were last season. I'm personally projecting a step forward from Trevor Lawrence this year, so even if Kirk loses a little bit of the target share, I think they're going to be even more pass heavy team, a more efficient team, and I think Christian Kirk could still post really big numbers. And on top of that, he's currently being drafted in the late fourth round. And with that current ADP, he should cost you roughly 9% of your budget. And on ESPN, he only costs you 3%. So that's just a huge steal for me. In almost every mock draft I've done on the ESPN platform, I draft him as one of my later wide receivers just because he's basically free. And I'm fairly confident he'll finish the season as a wide receiver 2 or 3. So I love Christian Kirk and especially the value that you can get for him on ESPN. So another player that I've been drafting a ton of at ADP and actually seems to be a value over on ESPN is Mark Andrews. I'm super high on Mark Andrews this season. I think he's going to be the clear tight end 2 in fantasy, and honestly, he's got upside to be the tight end 1. He finished as the tight end 1 just 2 seasons ago, and this is a Ravens team that claims they want to be more pass heavy, and if that happens, then Mark Andrews really could perform up there with Kelsey. Obviously, I still think Kelsey's going to be the tight end 1, but Mark Andrews is one of the few tight ends that even you can make the argument has the opportunity to be better than that. And he's currently being drafted in the middle of the third round, which suggests he should cost you roughly 14% of your budget. And on ESPN, he's only 10.5%. So given that I love his value, even at his ADP, being on a platform that's giving you a discount on the player, it's just an absolute bargain there. He's just a player that I find myself drafting again in almost every single mock draft I do on ESPN. He's a player that I think is honestly undervalued at his ADP, and then with the bargain that you're getting on the ESPN platform, he's just somebody that I'm definitely targeting. So another wide receiver I'll talk about here is Jeudy. I think Jeudy has a legitimate shot to break out this season. We saw him really perform really well down the stretch at the end of last season, even in a year that the Broncos were truly awful. And he currently has an ADP that actually at that ADP, I do find myself avoiding him. He's currently being drafted with an ADP of pick 37. That puts him as the first pick in the fourth round in most drafts, and I think that's a little bit too high for me. I view him as more of a late fourth, early fifth round draft pick, but on ESPN, he happens to be coming in at a significant discount. He should cost you roughly 11% of your budget based on that ADP, but on ESPN, he's only going to cost you about 6. So I think if you do want exposure to Jeudy, which I do because I think he's got some legitimate upside, I recommend getting it on leagues that you are doing on the ESPN platform. He's clearly a really great bargain on this platform, and I think he's got enough upside that he's certainly worth taking that bargain on. And just to get a running back in here, I'll talk about Antonio Gibson. It seems very clear after looking at the data here that ESPN still has truly not shifted over to that wide receiver heavy approach that we're seeing sort of be consensus so far. It'll be interesting to see how that plays out over the rest of this offseason here, but Gibson's one of my favorite running backs to grab later on in drafts, even at his current ADP. He's currently being drafted around pick 95, so at the end of the 8th round, and I think that's a perfect place to be drafting him. I think he's got a lot of upside, and he could certainly be a quality running back too this season. But on ESPN, it makes it really difficult to find values at the running back position because most of them are pushed up in their ADPs just because, consensus over the last few years, we've seen running backs go much earlier, and we're just now sort of seeing this shift towards a more wide receiver heavy approach in drafts. So on ESPN, though, I think you can sort of get a bit of a value here. Gibson should cost you roughly 2% of your budget based on his ADP, but he's effectively free on the ESPN platform. His pre-draft value is $1 or 0.5% of your budget. He's a player that I think is certainly worth a dart throw on ESPN, especially just because, especially in the ESPN platform, it's really difficult to find value at that running back position compared to other platforms. So if you want to look for it later in drafts, which is sort of what I would recommend on ESPN, I think Gibson's the perfect player to do that on. So that'll do it for this video. Up next, I'll be putting out a video that goes over the worst or some of the worst auction draft values on the ESPN platform. I'll be sure to upload all of this data that I've compiled onto my website as well so that you can use that for free. I certainly would recommend that you can use the expected cost of a player that is generated based off of their ADP. You should look at that and compare it to the players that you have in your platforms. Obviously, these values or these pre-draft values that I'm generating based off of ADP are not exactly the values that I would recommend you pay. So even if a player happens to be viewed as a value on this list that comes out here, it doesn't necessarily mean I agree with it. You'll see that I have Calvin Ridley supposedly as a value, but Calvin Ridley is just a player that I'm sort of out on. So that's just an example of a player that at his ADP, the best place to draft him would be on ESPN, but it's just not a player that I find myself targeting even with that discount. But I think it's really useful to see these pre-draft values and see how they compare to what you should be expecting to pay based off of their ADP, and it's going to be a really useful way to go into your draft with a little bit of an edge. I don't think people look platform to platform and see what sort of advantages they can get there. I think it's something that you can certainly take an advantage of. So yeah, like I said, I know this is a little bit complicated. If you have any questions, I'm happy to share how I calculated these auction values as well. I may put a bit of a blurb on that blurb about that on the website. I'll make sure to put those values up on there as well so that you guys can take a look at those. And I'll try and get more platforms involved here. I figure most of you are doing your drafting on ESPN, so that's the one I really want to highlight. But especially on the website, I can put up stuff for Sleeper and other platforms as well, just so you guys have that. So yeah, if you made it this far in the video, I hope you did like it. If you did, please do take the time to give it a thumbs up. It really helps with the YouTube algorithm. I also would really appreciate it if you subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. I'd really love to help grow this channel. It's been a lot of fun putting videos together. I think I'm really doing my best to help you guys, and hopefully you think that too. So if you want more content like this, please do subscribe to the channel. And with that being said, I'll catch you next time.